it's going to be 30 again, but it's going to be 2:30.
Yeah, so I have to
But
make
that's,
sure that.
even that's okay because it's my, you know.
Right, so I have to make sure I'll be looking at the watch and just adjust it. So I'm saying
That's fine.
mine could be like, I think minutes afterwards I hear these things.
Right.
So I would
That would help.
skip. And even mine, if I say the whole thing, is like 6 minutes.
So you're probably.
あやさん、ログインできない。
また
あ、中島さん、いたいた。ねえねえ、ログインできなくなってんだけど、YouTube また。
ほら、言ったじゃん、吉田さんがログアウト
大丈夫だとか言ってたんだけど。
大丈夫じゃない。
Probably dealt with the,
That's not
the
listed,
official.
but this is the first.
どうした？なんか中島さんタブレットかなんか使った？ど
だからその後ログアウトさせろって吉田さんが言ってたじゃん。
うやってやるの？
どうやってのいや大丈夫だからあれだ。
もうこのままで大丈夫。
もう本当にアクセス1回すれば大丈夫になるって言ってたよ。
大丈夫になってない。
知らない。
Forever not.
中島さんのなんかそのタブレットかなんかでログアウトでき
ログ
ない。
アウトしてる。だけど強制ログアウトもできるから、
どうやって？
綾部さんが。
いや俺なってないです。大丈夫だ。
それは僕言われて。
いやいやいや。
習ってないって言われて。
今 YouTube つながってる？
やる
あ、こっちで作ったの。
まあだからこういうことが起こるからちゃんと習っておきなさいよ。
今日やっといてもらうかな。サッカーさんこれできない。
いない。もうね、電話番号のところにももうね、
北原さんも
ダメ。
そうなの。
うん。
違うな。
うん。
はい、5分前です。録画始めます。綾部さん。
はい。ん？
please welcome their guest speaker.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Eric Johnston. I'm a member of the Professional Activities Committee, which arranges press conferences, and it's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be able to welcome today three distinguished speakers who are going to talk about Japan's nuclear policy and the Noto Peninsula, and whether or not that policy is on shaky ground. The New Year's Day earthquake, of course, garnered domestic and international media coverage, and it reminded people that the Japan seaside of the country as well is vulnerable to nuclear power problems. This is not news to a lot of people. Long ago, the award-winning Kyoto Journal magazine wrote an article called Alice in Shiga Land, which talked about the nuclear power problems up in Shiga, Ishikawa Prefecture, and I think we're going to hear some of those problems today. With us, we have three distinguished speakers. First, Susumu Kitano, who is the chief plaintiff of the Shiga nuclear power plant must be decommissioned lawsuit group, and he's also a former member of the Ishikawa Prefectural Assembly. He's going to talk about what things are like from a local angle. Then Shoko Murakami, who is the Chief Secretary for the Citizens Commission on Nuclear Energy, who will give us a broader perspective. And then, of course, Eileen Mioko Smith, Executive Director of Green Action, who has appeared at FCCJ several times in the past. We'll talk also about what's going on and with Japan's nuclear power industry. Before we begin, just some housekeeping matters. Please make sure that your electronic devices are on silent mode. And to let you know what's going on, Mr. Kitano will speak first, followed by Ms. Murakami, followed by Ms. Smith. And after that, we'll open the floor up to questions and answers. We do have people not only present here, but also watching online, and we will take questions from both groups. With that, I would like to turn the microphone over to Kitano-san, so he will begin the presentation. Kitano-san, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
石川県珠洲市の北野と申します。能登半島地震と原発のリスクについて、今日はお話をさせていただきたいと思っています。
Hello, my name is Kitano, and I am from Suzu City in Ishikawa Prefecture. And today I will be speaking to you about the Noto Peninsula earthquake and the risks of nuclear power plants.
今日はご覧のような内容でお話をさせていただきたいと思っています。
So today I will be speaking about the content which you can see on the slide here.
能登半島地震で、私の住む珠洲市をはじめ、能登は大きな被害を受けました。しかし、2つの幸運がありました。1つ目の幸運、珠洲原発はなくてよかったということについて、まず説明させていただきたいと思います。
The city of Suzu, where I live, and all other parts of the Noto Peninsula were severely damaged by the recent Noto Peninsula earthquake. However, there were two fortunate facts which were at play within this. The first was the fact that the nuclear power plant at Suzu had not been constructed. There was no Suzu nuclear power plant, and that is the first point which I will speak about.
能登半島地震では150キロの断層が動いたとされていますが、その震央は かつての珠洲原発の予定地の一つ、関西電力が立地しようとしていた高谷の裏山です。
It is said that in the recent Noto Peninsula earthquake, 150 kilometers of fault line moved, and the center of this was in the mountains behind Takaya, which was one of the former plant sites for the Suzu nuclear power plant, planned by Kansai Electric Power.
中部電力が予定をしていた寺家からも8キロ程度の距離のところです。2つの予定地の今の様子を紹介したいと思います。
And it was also just about 8 kilometers from Jike, which was the location where Chubu Electric Power was planning to build a nuclear power plant there. So I'll introduce today the situation at these two sites.
この左の写真は地震前の時系です。そして、右の写真はこの地震の後1月20日に写した写真です。この炉心の予定地が大きく隆起し、陸域に広がっているのがお分かりいただけるかと思います。
So these photographs show the situation of the site here. And to say on the slide it says Teraya, but this pronunciation should be Jike. This place, Jike, is showing on the left the area before the earthquake, and the photo on the right was taken on January 20th. We can see that the earthquake caused a large uplift near the plant site of where the reactor core was to be sited, and the land area has extended along the coast in this way.
この左の写真も、予定地の中です。左の写真は地震の前、そして右の写真は地震の後です。この辺りも、隆起は1メーターほど、1メートルほどあって、原発があったらとても耐えられる状況ではありません。
So this is also another photograph of the planned site for the nuclear power plant. On the left is before the earthquake, and on the right is after. And here we can see that there is an uplift of the land of around 1 meter, which is a scale or a size which could not have been withstood if there had been a nuclear power plant on the site.
この左上の写真は高谷です。地震前の高谷の写真です。これが今は右の写真のようになっています。このテトラポットの前、写真の向き逆ですが、テトラポットの前に大きく岩場が広がっているのがお分かりいただけるかと思います。
So this is photographs of the site of Takaya. On the top left, you can see the site prior to the earthquake, and on the right, the situation that it is now following the earthquake in front of these tetrapods. The photograph was taken from the opposite direction. However, you can see this significant change in the area and the uplift of the land.
この真ん中の下の写真、私の身長よりももっと高い2メーター程度隆起していることがこの防波堤で分かります。原発が建設されていたら悲惨なことになっていたでしょう。
And in the center bottom photograph here, you can see the breakwater, and you can see that it has risen to a height of higher or taller than I am, of around 2 meters. So we can see that it would have been disastrous if the nuclear power plant had been constructed there.
これも高谷の予定地の写真です。港には大きな亀裂が走り、陥没もあり、港の機能を失っています。落石や土砂崩れもあちこちで見られます。
This is also the planned site at Takaya. We can see here the very large cracks and the sinking of the land, which has led it to lose its function as a port. And also their falling rocks and landslides can be seen in many areas.
高谷と寺家、珠洲原発の計画は私たちの反対運動の力によって阻止しました。
The construction of the nuclear power plants at both Takaya and Jike were stopped because of our movement or our opposition movement, our efforts.
2つ目の幸運についてお話しします。北陸電力の志賀原発が13年間停止中だったということです。
And the second fortunate aspect was that the Hokuriku Electric Power's Shika nuclear power plant had been shut down for 13 years.
原発敷地内は震度5弱の揺れでしたが、多くの施設の損傷、トラブルが明らかになりました。
Although the tremors on the plant site were of an intensity of 5 on the Japanese seismic scale, many facilities were damaged and many problems became evident.
地震後の職員の対応にも多数の問題点がありました。もし稼働中だったら原子炉の緊急停止、 そして原子炉の冷却という難しい対応が求められますが、北陸電力の職員が完全に職務を遂行できるとは思えません。
There were also numerous problems with the response of the facility's staff after the earthquake as well. If the plant had been in operation at the time, the very difficult response would have required an emergency shutdown of the reactors and also cooling. And I don't believe that the Hokuriku Electric Power Company staff would have been fully capable of carrying out these difficult tasks.
止まっていてよかったと、私だけではなく、多くの住民が感じています。
Many residents, not only myself, are very much relieved that the plant had already been stopped.
珠洲に原発はなくてよかった、鹿は止まっていてよかった、この2つの幸運がなかったら、福島以上に痛ましいことになったと思われます。
So we are, of course, glad about these two fortunate elements, that there was no construction of the plant in Suzu and also that the Shiga plant had been stopped down. However, there was still this enormous amount of damage which caused, and this could have led to even more serious problems than at Fukushima.
これからのことも心配です。志賀原発の近くで、次の大地震は来ないのでしょうか。地震学者が次々と警告を発しています。
And we are also concerned about what could happen from now. Can we really be sure that there will not be a next major earthquake near the Shiga nuclear power plant? And this is something about which seismologists are issuing warnings again and again.
志賀原発の周りには大きな活断層が集中しています。果たして、志賀原発は次の地震に耐えられるのでしょうか。
There are large active faults densely located around the Shiga nuclear power plant. Will it really be able to withstand any next earthquake?
次に、私の住んでいる珠洲市を中心に能登の様子を少し紹介したいと思います。珠洲市や輪島市では多くの地域が壊滅状態になりました。
Next, I would like to introduce the current situation in Noto with a focus on my home city of Suzu. Many areas in both Suzu and also the city of Wajima were completely destroyed.
倒壊家屋の下敷きになった人の救助や孤立集落の救援、救助、地元の消防や消防団、警察が懸命に最大限の努力をしましたが、圧倒的にマンパワー不足です。
Local firefighters or fire brigades and police put all of their efforts into rescuing people trapped under collapsed houses and supporting isolated communities. However, there was an overwhelming lack of manpower.
加えて彼ら自身がこの地震の被災者です。全国からの消防隊や災害救助の専門チームが多くの命を救いました。
In addition, these personnel themselves are also victims of the disaster. So it was fire brigade and specialized disaster relief teams from all over Japan who came in to save many lives.
孤立集落の住民を救ったのも全国からの救助活動に入った人たちです。
It was also rescue workers from across the country who saved the residents in isolated settlements.
防災業務の先頭に立つ市長をはじめとした市役所の職員もほぼ全員が被災者です。こうした中で市の防災業務を助けているのは全国から支援に入った自治体職員です。
The mayor and other city hall employees who lead the disaster management efforts are almost all themselves also victims of the disaster, themselves impacted. Therefore, it is municipal employees from across Japan have come to assist the disaster management response by the city.
震災後、真っ先に求められるのは道路の復旧です。しかし、地元の建設業者も被災し、重機やダンプカーも倉庫が倒壊し、動かせません。ここでも活躍したのは地域外の事業者の皆さんです。
After the earthquake, the very first thing needed is the restoration of roads. However, local construction companies are, of course, also affected, and their heavy machinery or dump trucks were unable to be moved due to collapsed warehouses. So again, it was businesses from outside the region that here played an active role.
食料や生活物資も全国からのトラックが運んでくれました。
Food and daily commodities were also brought in by trucks from all over Japan.
もしここに原発事故が重なったら果たしてどうなるでしょうか。被爆のリスクがありますから支援は途絶え地域は孤立状態が続きます。
So, what would happen if a nuclear disaster were also to coincide at the same time? Because of the risk of exposure, this support from outside would be cut off and the community would remain isolated.
そんな中で、原子力防災業務を担える人は果たしているでしょうか。これは昨年の志賀原発の原子力防災訓練の様子です。
So, in such a situation, are there really any, or is there really anyone who can actually take responsibility for the nuclear disaster management duties? This is photographs from the training or disaster prevention training held at the Shiga nuclear power plant last year.
防災計画では、さまざまな取り組みで住民を放射能から守ることになっていますが、防災業務を担う人がいないのですから、防災計画は破綻することが明らかです。
The disaster management plan states that various initiatives would be developed to protect the population from radiation. But it is clear that because there would be no one there to actually take charge of these tasks, this plan would fail.
能登半島地震を正しく教訓化しなければなりません。地震の被害は能登固有、あるいは半島固有の事情もあったと思います。
We must correctly take heed of the lessons of the Noto Peninsula earthquake. The damage caused by the earthquake could be said to be unique to Noto or to places which are geographically a peninsula.
しかし、原発事故が重なり、地域が孤立するのは原発立地地域共通の課題です。
However, isolation of the region due to the combination of the natural and the nuclear disasters is a problem which is common to all regions where nuclear power plants are located.
原子力規制委員会の山中委員長は、原子力災害対策指針について、基本的な考え方は変えない、屋内退避の運用についてのみ議論を行うとしています。
Mr. Yamanaka, the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, does not change his basic approach to the nuclear emergency response guidelines, saying that only the operation of indoor evacuation or sheltering in place will be discussed.
能登半島地震の被災地の現状を見ようとせず、原発震災も軽視しています。
He refuses to look at the current situation in areas affected by the Noto earthquake and also underestimates the potential nuclear disaster.
自然災害に原発事故が重なったら、自然災害への対応すらできず、地域は孤立します。
If a natural disaster were to be combined with a nuclear disaster, the region would not even be able to cope with the impacts of the natural disaster and would be isolated.
大地震が起これば自力での避難は困難となります。外部からの救助が不可欠ですが、外部からの救助をできなくするのが原発事故です。両者が重なると原発震災になります。住民は閉じ込められ、被爆にさらされます。
If a major earthquake occurs, it is difficult to evacuate just by oneself. External rescue or rescue from the outside is essential. However, a nuclear accident makes such rescue impossible. So the combination of these two is what results in a nuclear disaster, where residents are trapped and then exposed to radiation.
救援もなく、汚染地域の孤立は長期化します。避難計画は成り立たず、住民の安全を確保することはできません。
The isolation of contaminated areas without relief would be prolonged. Evacuation plans would not be feasible, and the safety of the population could not be ensured.
岸田政権は原子力防災の破綻を認め、原子力政策を転換すべきです。
The Kishida government should acknowledge the failure of its nuclear disaster prevention policies and change their nuclear policy.
以上で私の報告を終わらせていただきます。
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Murakami, please, and if you could keep it as short as possible, that would be much appreciated.
I'd like to address two flaws in the nuclear regulatory standards that were established after the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011. As Mr. Kitano pointed out, not facing and tackling these issues would mean a countdown to a potential next nuclear disaster. The map of Japan on the left side shows the probability of ground motions equal to or larger than the seismic intensity of 6 lower, occurring within 30 years from 2020. You see Noto Peninsula here, and the epicenter is here. It seems yellow, meaning 3% possibility. Regardless of ranking in probability, in any place in Japan, there may be strong shaking due to earthquake. Those of us who experienced the Fukushima disaster know that an earthquake could cause a severe accident at a nuclear power plant. However, nuclear regulators have been rather slow to respond to earthquake danger. Power companies were asked to assess the design basic seismic motion for an NPP after regulatory authority revised its guideline in 2006. Still, earthquakes exceeding the upgraded design basis occur repeatedly, including the recent Noto Peninsula earthquake. After the Fukushima disaster, some earthquake countermeasures have been tightened, such as forced decommissioning once an active fault is confirmed under the reactor turbine building area. But measures are limited to the extent so as to allow operation of most of the existing reactors. There have always been disputes over whether it is an active fault or not, or how long those faults could be linked. But in the end, a conclusion was drawn so that the nuclear power plant can operate. What we've seen from the Noto Peninsula earthquake shows that the question needs to be whether it is even possible to design nuclear power plants based on the largest scale of natural disaster. Regarding disaster preparedness, there was a problematic change in nuclear regulation after the Fukushima disaster. The premises changed from nuclear accident will never happen, which is the safety myth, to nuclear accident can happen. Then what happened? The nuclear reactor siting evaluation requirements, the highest order regulation of nuclear power plant siting to ensure public safety, were repealed. Shunichi Tanaka, a former chair of NRA, once said at the press conference that an order of such radioactive release as in Fukushima would no longer be compatible with the site requirements, which means that the operation of the nuclear power plant was prioritized over the safety of the people. If an accident occurred, the residents would be exposed to radiation. If so, comprehensive and rigorous disaster preparedness and evacuation plans are needed. However, in the current regulation, there is no mechanism to ensure the effectiveness or feasibility of local disaster management and evacuation plan. Local governments are responsible for developing these plans based on the NRA's guidelines. However, the NRA has no uniform review criteria. Viability of the disaster management evacuation plans are not legal requirements when the NRA reviews for the construction or operation of nuclear power plants. The Cabinet Nuclear Disaster Prevention Council approves disaster prevention and evacuation plans before nuclear power plants are restarted. But this is just a formality and not a professional verification. The bottom of the safety net has fallen out. So people are keep filing lawsuits all over the country to stop nuclear power plants. In March 2021, the Mito District Court ordered the suspension of the Tokai Daini nuclear power plant. The judge ruled that we must say emergency response is extremely inadequate. However, even after the Noto earthquake, the chair of the NRA said the current guidelines and regional disaster management plan developed by local government can respond to the situation. Prime Minister Kishida said, if the NRA finds that the system complies with the new regulatory standards, it will not change its policy to resume operation. What lies ahead of a system in which no one takes responsibility is a potential second Fukushima nuclear disaster and people suffering. How about other nuclear power plants? Hamaoka is located in the hypocenter of Tokai earthquake. Ikata is just along a median tectonic line. There are no nuclear power plants free from seismic risk in Japan. We are on a countdown to the next nuclear disaster. What will happen depends on whether the Noto Peninsula earthquake can be taken as a final warning. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. And Ms. Smith, please.
Thank you very much. My remarks will be, brief, but my remarks will be brief, but you'll be able to see them with the QR code that we have here. I'll show the QR code at the end again. Okay, the speakers have mentioned how Japan is seismically active and there are nuclear power plants throughout the country. I'll be speaking about the plants on the Japan Sea coast on both sides of the Noto Peninsula. First, Kashiwazaki Kariya. The citizens say that this is a plant built on tofu. It's vulnerable to earthquakes. There have been 2 large earthquakes nearby. The second was a Niigata Chuetsu-oki magnitude 6.8 earthquake. This was the largest earthquake on record to hit an operating nuclear power plant in proximity. Seismic motion was 4 times the design basis of the plant's structure. 2 days after this earthquake, we came to FCCJ. There were 2 speakers, Ishibashi Katsuhiko, who's a seismologist, and he stated that this is the last warning before a nuclear disaster brought on by an earthquake. And Mr. Takemoto from Kariwa came. I don't know how he got to Tokyo. His shed was wrecked. The place was a mess, but he managed to come, and he said that we have been opposing this plant since 1968, and it's so dangerous. Now moving on to Fukui. Wakasa Bay. Half the nuclear power plants currently operating in Japan are located here at the Mihama, Oi, and Takahama sites. Honing in on Mihama, people are very concerned in this area about protuberance. This was what was found in Noto, where the ground rose up. You saw the photographs. Because in this area during the Edo period, there was a 4-meter protuberance right nearby. And so citizens are very concerned that this will happen in Mihama also. Moving on to Oi. Oi was the first nuclear power plant to restart after Fukushima. This is the aerial view, and the lines there are the fault lines that Kansai Electric found before the plant was built. We sued the government regarding this approval, and we won in Osaka District Court on December 2020. I'm co-chief plaintiff of this lawsuit. The court nullified NRA's approval of OE Units 3 and 4. We are now in appellate court, and the next session will be held on the 22nd, this Thursday. Going to this year right now, February 2nd, citizens from nearby nuclear power plants on the Japan coast and also the 2 locations where the reactors are about to restart joined together and presented a petition to the NRA. They said, stop the reactors and do not approve restarts until Noto findings are finalized. However, as you can see from the other speakers, this is not happening. The head of the NRA, Yamanaka Shinsuke, says that it will take many years, number of years, before the Noto findings are finalized. And yet, he states that nuclear power operation and restart application approval reviews will continue to move forward as usual. The 2 speakers have talked about, especially Mr. Kitano has spoken about management of emergency management. And just last week, the NRA is quoted as saying, basically, there are only 2 ways to protect against radiation exposure: evacuation, see the photo on the right, and sheltering in place, see the photo on the left. Now, the situation is the same all over Japan within a 30-kilometer radiation area where, 30-kilometer radius. There are huge populations. These are evacuation zones. You can see the population on the right. And when Gregory Yasko, the former chair of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, was asked about the restart of Shimane nuclear power plant in light of the fact that there are 450,000 people living within 30 kilometers, said, "It's nuts to restart Shimane." I know he said that. He said it right in front of me. I was his interpreter. Going to Kansai, this is the Union of Kansai Government's nuclear accident evacuation plan. It's huge areas that have to relocate. We in Kansai have a network addressing evacuation issues, and we've petitioned over 100 times the various local authorities concerning this issue. I won't have time to talk about this, but both Oi nuclear site and Mihama have populations very nearby and only a couple of roads to run away from, and it's very vulnerable. Also, within Kyoto City and Kyoto Prefecture, 10 cities and towns may need to do internal sheltering inside homes if there were a huge accident. This is front page of the Kyoto Shimbun. Also, Hyogo has done a simulation, and the Kobe mayor is quoted as saying that the plume would arrive in Kobe in 2 hours. Citizens from 49 countries have petitioned Kyoto City saying, "Save Japan's culture treasures from radiation." Finally, the Fukushima accident is ongoing, and we have organized a 311 candlelight. This is to commemorate Fukushima, the ongoing accident. It will be done March 11th at 7:03 p.m. The declaration of nuclear emergency issued 13 years ago came on March 11th at 7:03 p.m. and remains in effect. And finally, again, the QR code. You can see our presentations here and also supplementary material. Thank you very much for your interest.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to all three speakers for excellent presentations. I'd like to move now to the Q&A, and we've got about 30 minutes. How it works, again, is I will take questions from both people attending here as well as online. If you have a question, please raise your hand, come up to one of the microphones, and please give your name, your affiliation, and to whom you are addressing the questions. So, any questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
Nishimura, freelance journalist. Thank you very much. Let me ask in Japanese. 日本語で伺います。今回の地震で被害を受けた方にお見舞い申し上げます。その上で北野さんにお聞きしたいと思いますけれども、私聞いたことあるのは福島の地震の時、原子力原発事故で、避難の指示なり責任持つのが立地自治体に対しては国が責任を持ち、それ以外の周辺の自治体に対しては県が、情報を提供するなり指示するなりのシステムになっていたと伺ったことがあります。で、今回の地震で北野さんはどういう形で志賀原発に異常があるかないか含めて連絡を受けましたか。県や国などからの指示なり連絡は情報提供などはありましたか。それから避難
通訳お願いしますか。
So my name is Nishimura, freelance. First of all, condolences to all those who were impacted by the recent disaster. My question is for Mr. Kitano. I heard that at the time of the earthquake and nuclear disaster in Fukushima, the instructions for evacuation, or who was responsible for that, for the areas around the site, it was the national government which is responsible, and those surrounding areas, the prefectural government, which is responsible for issuing orders for evacuation and so on. I'd like to ask, in the case of the recent earthquake, what route was it possible for you to check information about the status of the Shiga nuclear power plant? And was there any information provided or communicated to you or to residents from either the prefectural or national governments?
Okay.
避難に関しては、もしこの事故があった場合、半島のような形の時には避難が非常に難しいと思います。道路なども破損しましたし、で、これですね、もし起きたらどんなことが起きたとどんな被害が予想されたのか、それで今の避難計画で足りないものがあるとすればどういうことなのか、これは言い方とかに共通する問題だと思うので、避難についてお伺いしたいと思います。
And the continuation of the question, of course, considering the nature of the peninsula, if evacuation were to be necessary, it would be extremely difficult with the destruction of roads and so on as well. So what kind of damage or impact would there have been if indeed there had been a nuclear accident in this recent case? And what do you see as any insufficiencies or problems with the current evacuation plan? And the same could probably be said for the same as the Ikata nuclear power plant as well. So this question is from Mr. Kitano first.
まず、今回の志賀原発の状況をどうやってしたのかということですが、これについては、北陸電力がプレス発表しているのを、それを通じて知ったと、特に石川県からは全然発表がありません。でこの地震の対策で、たくさんの被害がありますから、その災害の対策本部は設けていますが、その中で志賀原発の状況はこうなっていますという報告があるのかというと、一切ありません。地震被害だけで志賀原発の状況については一切ありません。
So first of all, as to how we found out information about the situation at the Shiga nuclear power plant following the recent earthquake. This was through the press announcements which were made by the Hokuriku electric company, the power company. There was absolutely no announcement made in regards to this from the Ishikawa prefecture or the prefectural government. Of course, given the big damage which was caused by the earthquake and the measures which were put in place, there was the disaster measures headquarters established by the prefecture. However, whether there was any reports or information about the situation at the Shiga nuclear power plant, there was absolutely none at all. This was only focusing on the earthquake.
元日のこの地震で志賀町は震度7、そして大津波警報が発令されました。でこれによって今の防災計画でいうと警戒事態に入ります。
And so in the January 1 earthquake, the magnitude which was measured on the Japanese scale at Shiga was 7, and there was a large tsunami warning which was issued at that time as well. So this means that it does put it on the warning situation within the current definition of the plan.
この警戒事態に入ったけれど、計画に盛り込まれていることはほとんどできなかった。要するに初動体制で破綻するということが一つ明らかになったと思います。
However, despite the fact that it was put officially into this state, there was actually almost no function or no capacity to implement what's actually decided within the disaster management plan. This shows that the plan itself almost completely collapsed at this very initial response stage.
それから2つ目の質問、避難できない状況の中で、事故があったらどうなるのかと、福島の事故の場合は、情報の、間違いなり、混乱もあったりしましたけれど、時間をかけて多くの方は避難をしていきました。ただこの能登の場合は時間をかけても避難できない、そういう意味では福島以上に悲惨な原発震災になってたんではないかなと思います。
And as to what would have happened in the case of a nuclear accident having occurred in a situation where evacuation is very difficult due to being a peninsula, well, we see in the case of following the Fukushima nuclear disaster, while there was, of course, misinformation or severe confusion at the time, over time people were evacuated from the affected areas. However, in the case of Noto, we can see that this, even with time being spent on this evacuation would not have been possible. So it could have led to an even more severe or disastrous impact compared even to Fukushima.
それから3つ目の質問、今の避難計画の中で足りないもの、これはもう避難計画が不十分、住民を守れないものならば原発を止めるというところの、そこが明確にされていないところが問題だと思っています。
And the third question as to the insufficiencies of the current evacuation plans. Well, I think it's plain that if it's not possible to even implement what is in the existing evacuation plans, then what must be done, therefore, is actually to stop the nuclear power plants completely. That is the only way to ensure the safety.
よろしいでしょうか。
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? I believe you had your hand up first.
文化放送の吉田と申します。今日はお話ありがとうございます。私も北野さんにお話を伺いたいと思います。今回能登半島地震が起きましたが、もしも原発が立地していてかつ 稼働していた状態で今回のような大きな地震が起こった場合の懸念として2つ伺いたいと思います。まず交通インフラについてどんな懸念がおありでしょうか。またもし放射性物質が漏れ出してしまった場合の懸念、どんなことが考えられますでしょうか。お願いします。
I also have a question of Mr. Kitano. I'm from Bunka Hoso. In regards to the recent earthquake, if there had been a nuclear power plant constructed in the area and it had been operating at the time of the earthquake, I have two questions about what your concerns may be specifically in regards to this. First would be concerns about the transportation or traffic infrastructure in the area. And second, about if there were to be any leaking or release of radioactive materials in the area, what your concern specifically to this would be.
ありがとうございます。まず1点目、交通インフラについてですが、道路の破損状況、これはすでに大きく報道されていますが、大規模な損壊、あるいは陥没、隆起、崖崩れ等で、全く交通不能状況です。で、実は私は、ごめんなさい。
So first of all, in regards to the transportation or traffic infrastructure, as has been very reported widely in the media, we've seen that there was severe destruction or damage caused to the roads in the area. There's also the large landslides, the rocks falling, and this kind of information is very well known as well, and it was really not even able to pass through the roads in the area.
私は実は元日の午後、金沢の方に出ていまして、珠洲の自宅に帰れない状況になりました。で、なぜ帰れないかというと、なかなか道路が復旧しないからです。大きな損壊もありますが、道路は小さな亀裂があっても、あるいは橋の前後で段差があっても、もう通れなくなる。そこは本当に最後通れるまでにするには、長い時間がかかる。多くの人手がかかるということです。
And actually, on the afternoon of January 1st, when the earthquake occurred, I was actually in the city of Kanazawa at the time. And I was, for quite some considerable time, not able to return to my home in Suzu. The reason for this was, of course, the damage to the roads. There was severe damage, a very large damage to the roads in the entire area. But actually, for the roads, even when there is very small cracks in the road or just even small changes in the height or the level, for example, of the areas coming on and off bridges, means that it is not able to pass there. So it took some very considerable time before we were able to pass through the road to return to Suzu.
防災訓練では海からの避難も想定しています。ただ今回の場合は、その珠洲から輪島にかけての、その外浦と言っていますが、そちら側はもう隆起して港が使えない。そして、富山湾側、こちらは津波で、大きな被害が出て、あるいは、その港にいろんな流れたものがあって、結局、どこからも、一部だけ、自衛隊入ったところありますが、基本的には、その海からの避難もできないというのが明らかになったと思います。
And according to the evacuation training, which had been conducted beforehand, there were also plans for evacuation not only by road, but via the water, via sea as well. For example, from the city of Suzu to Wajima, using the area which is called Sotoura. However, in the case of the recent earthquake, this was not possible either. The ports were not able to function then as well in the Wajima direction because of the impacts of the earthquake. In the Toyama direction as well, due to tsunami damage, the ports there were also not accessible. There was also a lot of rubble or items which had been blown up as a result of the earthquake floating into the ports, which meant that they were not accessible as well. There was just one area where the self-defense forces were able to carry out evacuation by water, but that was just a very small example and was not possible in any other case.
もう一つ防災訓練では孤立集落の支援で空からヘリが入ることも想定されています。ただ今回ほとんどヘリは孤立集落の救援に入れませんでした。一部だけです。で、なぜかというと、孤立するような集落にはヘリが着陸できるような場所がないからです。結局、陸からも空からも海からも避難できないというのが今回明らかになりました。
And also in the evacuation plans or trainings which had been held before, there was also plans for carrying out evacuations from isolated communities by helicopter. However, this was also almost unable to be implemented in the recent disaster as well, only in very rare case. The reason for this being is in such isolated communities and villages, there is actually no site where a helicopter is able to land. Therefore, in this recent earthquake, we saw that evacuation was not possible, whether by land, sky, or sea.
それから質問の2点目、放射能がこういう状況の中で流れたらということですが、まず防災計画というと5キロ圏があります。放射能が流れてくる前に即時避難ということになっていますが、これはもう今申し上げたようにできません。
And as for the second question about concerns of radiation, in regards to the evacuation plans, the first is in regards to people within a 5-kilometer area of the site, in which it is said that before the radiation is even able to be released or leaked, that there should be immediate evacuation. However, for the reasons I've just mentioned, this was not possible.
それから5キロから30キロ圏、UPZ といいますが、このエリアについては、まずは屋内退避ということになっていますが、鈴なり宇和島なり、ご存知の通り、もう多くの家屋が倒壊をしている、あるいは立っていても、半壊でとても余震が続く中で入れない。あるいは仮に入っても放射能は防げない、もう戸が飛んだり窓が外れたりという状況ですから、とてももう防護機能は果たせないということが明らかになったと思います。
Next, we have the 5 to 30 kilometer area, which is known as the UPZ, and this is where it is said that what should be done is to shelter in place. However, of course, as you are aware, in the cases of Suzu and Wajima, there were many houses or buildings which collapsed completely. Even those which were still remaining standing, for example, it was not able to enter them due to the ongoing aftershocks, or other reasons, for example, maybe their roofs or windows and so on had been blown out or completely damaged, meaning that even sheltering inside these buildings would not provide protection from radiation.
あと放射線防護施設が一応あちこち作られていますが、残念ながらそこまでもたどり着くのも大変、あるいはもう倒壊した家屋の中で、脱出することも難しいという方も何人もいました。そういう中で、この屋内待機というのはやはり破綻したというふうに思っています。
And also, there are several locations where radioactive protective facilities or shelters and so on have been constructed. However, for the reasons mentioned, it was very difficult or even impossible to reach these places, or also not possible to shelter in place inside them because of the reasons mentioned.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of questions online, which I want to get to right now. One is from Shigenori Kanehira from TBS Television, Hodo Tokushu. His question is to Mr. Kitano. He says, what are your comments regarding the Nuclear Regulation Authority's reluctance to review the Nuclear Emergency Preparedness Guidelines? And are you going to take any concrete action against the NRA? For example, are you going to demand the dismissal of top NRA officials?
次、オンラインでの質問に移りたいと思います。まず最初、TBS の報道特集の金平さんからの質問になります。北野さんに対する質問です。規制委員会、原子力規制委員会に関する質問ですが、今回の地震を受けても、規制委員会がその原子力災害対策指針、なかなか見直しを行わないということに対するコメントです。見直しをしないことに対するコメント。また、規制委員会に対して何か具体的なアクション、行動などを考えられているのでしょうか。例えば、規制委員会のトップの辞任などを求めるような行動を予定されているかどうかということです。
原子力災害対策指針の基本的な考え方は見直さないということが先日の規制委員会の会議の中で確認をされています。で、先ほど申し上げたように、今回の地震の被害の実態を見ようとしない、そして、原発震災に向き合おうとしない、そういう原子力規制委員会の姿勢がここで、示されたと思っています。
First of all, the recent announcements by the NRA that they are not planning or not willing to conduct any review of these guidelines, even following the recent disaster, shows to me that they are not looking at all at the damage which was caused by this recent earthquake, and they are not willing to also face up to what would happen in the case of a nuclear disaster, to this potentiality as well. I think that this reluctance shows their basic stance clearly.
原子力規制委員会は2018年にこの、原子力災害対策の策定において参照すべき線量の目安というのを公表しています。
In 2018, the NRA made public their guidelines in regards to the dosage levels that should be considered in the case of setting measures prior to a nuclear disaster.
その中で、この防災 災害対策にあたってですね、被爆の目安として100ミリシーベルトという数字をここで示しています。
And within this, they put forward as to the level of exposure to radiation, the limits or the standard of 100 millisieverts.
今回、規制委員会は基本的な考え方は見直さず、屋内待機のその運用について見直すと言っています。
And so the NRA has recently, in their recent announcement, said that they will not conduct any review of the guidelines itself, but only look at the operations of the shelter in place.
要するに、規制委員会の今後の議論の方向としては、住民を逃がさない、その場所にとどめて、100ミリシーベルトを想定した、そういう被爆にさらしていく、そういう計画の見直しに進んでいくんではないかと、大いに危惧しています。本当に危ない方向だと思っています。
And therefore, looking at the discussions which will take place within or by the NRA from now, we can see that they are looking at not letting the residents leave from that area, making them stay in the place and be exposed to radiation up to levels of 100 millisieverts. This is something which I believe is extremely dangerous and of grave concern.
質問の2番目の今後の対応方針ということですが、原子力規制委員会は設置法で国民の生命、健康を守るということ、これが一番大事な目的として掲げられています。
And the second question as to the NRA or action toward the NRA, in the act which established the authority, it said that the most or the utmost objective or the purpose of the authority is to protect the lives and health of the people.
にもかかわらず、規制委員会が全会一致で、この見直さないという方針を確認したということは、私は委員長だけではなく、この委員全員がもう規制委員会の任にあらず、辞任すべきだというふうに思います。
However, the fact that the NRA unanimously says that they will not have any review of these guidelines says to me that it is not only the chair of the NRA who should be dismissed, but rather all of the members of the commission should be, or they are not worthy of being in this position. They're not fulfilling their role and should all step down.
Okay. Eileen, do you have something to add?
Just a comment. This is a photograph of the NRA officials. This, by the way, are the governors and mayors that have approved restart. But this is the one I wanted to show, and this is a stakeholders issue, because as you can see, this is the Bear report, U.S. National Academy of Sciences on radiation. As you can see, it's age related. In other words, people who are older are less affected by radiation. Children are affected much more, and females are more. And this is the problem.
Okay. Thank you. I'll go back to the floor. Yes, sir. You and your hand up.
本日はありがとうございます。ニコニコ動画の七尾と申します。よろしくお願いします。お三方に共通の質問させてください。最近のですね、政府対応だけ言いますと、ネガティブなことに関してはですね、極力情報を出さないようにして、国民がその関心を持たないようにしているとの指摘、これ少なくありません。一例としては、今回の能登半島地震で言いますと、ドローンを飛ばすことをですね、初期の段階で政府国交省を原則禁止していました。で、その後緩和したという話ではあるんですけど、またですね、報道特集さん、文化放送さん、本日いらしているメディアの方以外、大きく言うと、その大メディアがそもそも皆さんが指摘されているような情報を報じない、3.11 より後退しているかもしれない状況が今、生まれていると思います。つまりですね、深刻なリスク、あるいはリスクが発生する可能性を我々国民が認識できない状況が生まれていると思います。この点、率直にどう思われていますでしょうか。政府、メディア、電力会社、自治体、国民に対して、こうしてほしいという点があれば、ぜひ教えてください。
I have a question for each of the three speakers, a common question for each of you. In regarding the government's response in situations like this, they are not making, or it's said that they are not making public information which is negative and waiting for people to not be interested in this situation. An example was, for example, following soon after the Noto earthquake, there were not permission of drones to be flown, but after this, there was a review carried later on as well. We can see also that other than perhaps the media who is here today, they are not, mainstream media is not reporting talking very widely about the issues or the concerns which you have raised today as well. And I think it could be said that we have perhaps even taken a step back compared to the situation after the 3/11 disaster as well. So seeing the fact that both media and government is not talking about these serious risks, this means that also it is very challenging or difficult for the people, the public, to be aware of these risks at the same time. If you have any comment about this current situation and anything that you would like to call upon whether the government, the media, the utilities, or the people to do.
私の方からは、北電の問題点と、それから、石川県のことについて、お話ししたいと思いますが、まず北陸電力について、この間、北陸電力はプレス発表をしています。しかし、情報が小出しで、あるいは出した情報も後で訂正される、そういうことが繰り返されています。
I will respond particularly about the Hokuriku electric power plant and also the Ishikawa prefectural government. Well, Hokuden, the Hokuriku power company, has been making press announcements in regards to this. They are only releasing information very little by little, or also releasing information only to make revisions or call this back very soon after as well.
北陸電力はご存知のとおり、8年間臨界事故を隠したという、そういう前歴もあり、私はまだ出していない情報があるのではないかと、心配しているといいますか、疑っています。
As you are aware, Hokuriku Electricity also has a history of having hidden a critical accident in a nuclear power plant for 8 years, actually, as well. This gives us great concern that there is information which they are still withholding, which they are not announcing yet.
こうした中で、北陸電力はこの間、例えば政党からの調査団の受け入れとか、あるいは私たちが北陸電力に申し入れをするというのも実は拒否をしています。市民団体として申し入れするのは拒否をしている。で、今皆さんの方に伝わっているのは北陸電力からの一方的な情報発信です。
And within such a situation, however, the Hokuriku Utility Company is, for example, refusing requests either by political parties to conduct site visits or also our requests from citizens groups and so on to conduct appeals and so on to meet with them as well. This is meaning that the information which is being shared with the public is only this unilateral or one-way information from the utility.
原子力を扱う時のもう大原則として、公開の原則というのがあるわけでして、外部からの監視あるいはチェックが今入れないというか、北陸電力自ら拒否しているという状況は本当に異常だというふうに思っています。
And so one of the, of course, basic principles of nuclear power, of operations, is that information needs to be transparent, needs to be open as well. However, and there also needs to be the external monitoring or checks in place as well. So the situation now where the Hokuriku Power Company is refusing such external checks or monitoring is something which can be said to be a very unusual situation.
Okay, thank you. Could we go on to Murakami-san? We're running out of time.
はい、ですね。先ほどのご質問の中で福島原発事故後よりも悪くなっているのではないかというふうにおっしゃっていて、それは本当にそうだと思っています。でそれはやはりですね、この福島原発事故後に結局その被害を報じないようにその被害の状況を分かりにくくするようにしていくという取り組みがですね、12年間かけて行われてきて、昨年の原発回帰とですね、処理汚染水というふうに私たちは言ってるんですけれども、処理された福島原発事故サイトの汚染水の放出というところにつながった状況が今敷かれている。でそこで何が行われたかというとですね、その風評被害対策のために大量の広告費がですね、電通などのような機関に出されて、国からですね出されて、でそういった風評被害を防ぐためという名のもとに行われた情報発信がですね、非常に被害の状況を分かりにくくしている、覆っている状況が生まれていると思っています。ですので私たちが本当に何が真実なのかということをものすごく注意深くですね見ていかないと、本当に現実今何が起きているのか、真実がどこにあるのかというのは分かりにくい情報にあって、私たちも非常に苦労しているところでもっと分かりやすくと思いながらも圧倒的に物量が違いますので苦労しているところあるんですけど、でも本当にこうやって北野さんのようにもですね、現地周辺で本当に発信している人たちがいますので、ぜひ本当に福島原発事故後も日本のメディアよりも残念ながら海外メディアの方に情報を収集を皆さん 求めたことがありました。今、日本の状況というのは非常に憂う状況にあると思ってますので、今回、本当にこのような形で場を持ちましたのも、やはり日本のメディアはもちろんそうですけれども、海外メディアの方たちもですね、これ、原発事故がまた起きれば、日本だけの問題ではありませんので、ぜひ注目していただきたいですし、私たちも発信していきたいと思います。
The question mentioned about whether we have stepped back since the situation after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and unfortunately I believe that that is very much the case. After the Fukushima disaster, we saw very much the case of either not reporting much about the impacts of the disaster, or also even efforts to try and make this information hard to understand for people as well. And these efforts have been ongoing for the past 12 years since as well. This has connected to, for example, the situation last year in regards to what we call the treated contaminated water, and this is very much linked to that overall situation. So what has happened in this situation? This is where we see enormous amounts of money which is put into so-called preventing harmful rumors, or fuhyo higai. This is, for example, going to companies like advertising company Dentsu and so on from the national government, saying that it is in order to prevent these kind of harmful rumors from being conducted. However, what this is serving to do is minimize the impacts and also make it very difficult for people to understand what the impacts are and what these actually mean as well. This means that it is very difficult to really know what are the facts in regards to these kind of situations. This is something which which people need to watch very carefully in order to find out where is exactly the truth or the facts in these kinds of information and situations. This is something which is very challenging. This is where we, for example, are making efforts to try and make this information easily accessible or easy to understand as well. However, there is, of course, a difference in the amount of volume of the information which is being issued by groups such as ours or by these other efforts as well. This is why it is so important, for example, to listen to voices such as that of Mr. Kitano from these local areas which are impacted and who are working or following these issues as well. What is very much different here in the case of, or what we saw in the case of Fukushima, which is very different as well, was that people having to look to international media, overseas media, in order to find out this kind of information. So we see still the situation in Japan is very challenging, and so today's press conference, having the opportunity to share this information in this way is one step forward, but we will continue also in our efforts, and the media will also continue to make sure that these facts or about this situation can be made clear.
I think that FCCJ and the reporters that have decided to participate in this press conference are absolutely key. And I don't say this just because I'm here. I really believe that. I feel actually that this is quite a fateful day. I recall crystal clear back in 2007 when we came here and said this was the last warning. I didn't explain to you that there was huge interest at FCCJ and there were reporters really asking questions. I had to tear those two speakers away because there was a press conference scheduled at Menti. We arrived at Menti, there were about 100 reporters, and for 2.5 hours, right in front of us, all we saw was TEPCO coming in and reporters clustering around, swarming around them, reporting it, and then also the ministry, Menti ministry came and he did a press conference. And our scheduled press conference, we waited for 2.5 hours and we had to leave without saying a single word. And so I think that today is really important.
Okay, thank you. I would like to beg the speakers indulge just 2 more minutes. We have one last question that came in online. And the question is for Eileen Mioko Smith. It's from Christoph Neidhart, a freelancer. And Christoph asks, after Fukushima, the government suppressed radiation data. That's why SafeCast was founded, a citizens' organization to independently observe radiation and, if necessary, warn local populations. The Shiga nuclear power plant damage was SafeCast's first real live test in a disaster. How did SafeCast fare, and were there enough radiation measurements collected to get a clear picture and in time?
Okay, I don't think I could answer that properly. Since January 1st, our work has been to get the voices of citizens living right near nuclear power plants to be able to go to NRA and petition. So I'm not the best person to ask that question, answer that question. And it's been, I think that citizens right now are really, really working towards finally being able to have the citizens who live near nuclear power plants be able to have a voice and have an impact on nuclear policy. And this is not just people living a few kilometers away, but within the 30-kilometer radius, which is quite a huge population.
Okay, and with that, we are past time, but I would like to conclude today's press conference and thank the three speakers very much for coming. Please feel free to come up and pass off business cards or whatever. But once again, thank you all for coming.
M3 もなんか取れてるのがあるの